The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Windsor Castle like secrets waiting to be whispered. Sergeant Thomas Whitmore adjusted his red tunic for the 100th time that day, the gold buttons catching the pale sunlight that filtered through the courtyard. At 32, he had served the Royal Guard for nearly a decade, and every morning brought the same ritual of precision and protocol that had remained unchanged for centuries. Thomas had grown up in a small village outside London, where his father worked as a blacksmith and his mother tended to their modest garden. The idea of serving the crown had seemed like a distant dream until a recruiting officer visited their village when Thomas was 18. His parents had been proud beyond measure when he was accepted into the prestigious Royal Guard, though they worried about the strict demands of royal service. The position required absolute dedication. Guards were expected to maintain perfect posture, remain silent during their shifts, and never break character regardless of circumstances. They were living statues, protectors who blended into the background while remaining constantly alert. Thomas had mastered these requirements through years of training and experience, earning respect from his fellow guards and superiors alike. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, Thomas was assigned to the East Wing Corridor, a position that required him to stand watch near the family quarters. The assignment was considered both an honor and a test of discipline, as guards in this area often encountered members of the royal family during their daily routines. Any breach of protocol could result in immediate dismissal and permanent disgrace. The corridors of the East Wing were lined with portraits of monarchs dating back centuries, their painted eyes seeming to watch over anyone who passed beneath them. Heavy velvet curtains framed tall windows that offered glimpses of the castle gardens, where groundskeepers maintained flower beds with the same precision that guards maintained their posts. The air carried the faint scent of lavender and old wood, creating an atmosphere that was both grand and intimate. Thomas had been standing at his post for 2 hours when he first heard the sound of small footsteps approaching. The rhythm was familiar, quick, light steps that belonged to someone young and energetic. As the footsteps grew closer, he prepared himself mentally for the arrival of one of the royal children, knowing that maintaining his composure would be crucial. Princess Charlotte appeared around the corner, her school uniform slightly rumpled from morning activities. At 8 years old, she possessed the natural curiosity and energy typical of children her age, but there was something else in her demeanor that morning, a nervous energy that seemed different from her usual confident stride. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her school bag hung from one shoulder as she walked. The princess had always been known for her spirited personality and quick intelligence. Unlike her older brother George, who tended to be more reserved in public, Charlotte was naturally outgoing and showed genuine interest in the people around her. The castle staff had grown fond of her warm greetings and spontaneous questions, though they were always careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. As Charlotte approached Thomas's position, she slowed her pace and glanced around the corridor nervously. Her usual confident demeanor seemed replaced by something closer to anxiety, and she kept looking over her shoulder as if checking to see if anyone was following her. When she reached the point directly in front of Thomas, she stopped completely and looked up at him with wide, serious eyes. Thomas maintained his military bearing, staring straight ahead as protocol demanded. Guards were trained never to make eye contact with royal family members unless specifically addressed, and even then, interaction was to be kept to an absolute minimum. He had followed these rules faithfully throughout his career, understanding that his role was to be present but invisible, protective but unobtrusive. Charlotte stood there for several moments, her small hands fidgeting with the strap of her school bag. She appeared to be working up the courage to do something, her young face displaying an internal struggle between following rules and addressing whatever was troubling her. The morning light from the nearby window illuminated her face, highlighting the determination that was beginning to replace her earlier nervousness. "Excuse me," Charlotte said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air between them, creating a moment of tension that Thomas felt in every muscle of his trained body. He knew he should continue staring ahead, maintaining the professional distance that centuries of tradition demanded. Royal guards did not engage in conversation with family members unless given direct orders by senior staff or in cases of immediate danger. But something in Charlotte's tone gave Thomas pause. There was an urgency beneath her politeness, a quality that suggested this was not merely a curious child testing boundaries. His training had taught him to recognize genuine distress, and every instinct he had developed during his years of service was telling him that the princess needed help with something important. Charlotte took a small step closer, glancing around again to ensure they were alone in the corridor. "I know you're not supposed to talk to me," she continued, her voice still quiet but gaining strength. "But I really need someone to help me, and I don't know who else to ask. All the other grown-ups are too busy, and they keep telling me not to worry about things." The words struck Thomas like a physical blow. In all his years of service, he had never been directly addressed by a member of the royal family in such a personal manner. The protocols he had memorized and practiced thousands of times seemed to clash with the very human need he heard in Charlotte's voice. She was not making a casual request or testing his professional boundaries, she was asking for help. Thomas's mind raced through the possible consequences of breaking protocol. Engaging with Charlotte could result in his immediate dismissal, the end of a career he had worked years to build, and the disappointment of his family who had been so proud of his achievements. The royal guard took its traditions seriously, and deviation from established procedures was not tolerated under any circumstances. Yet as he looked down at Charlotte, though he tried to keep his gaze forward, he could see the genuine distress in her young face. Whatever was troubling her seemed significant enough to drive her to approach a guard, despite undoubtedly being taught the same protocols that governed his behavior. The 8-year-old princess was breaking her own rules, which suggested that whatever she needed help with was truly important to her. "I found something," Charlotte whispered, her voice taking on an even more urgent tone. "Something that I think might be really important, but when I tried to tell Mama and Papa about it, they said I was imagining things. But I know what I saw, and I know it's real. I think someone might be trying to hurt our family." These words sent a chill down Thomas's spine that had nothing to do with the cool October morning. The suggestion of a potential threat to the royal family triggered every protective instinct in his body, overriding years of training about proper protocol. His duty as a protector suddenly seemed more important than his duty to remain silent and invisible. Charlotte reached into her school bag and pulled out what appeared to be a folded piece of paper. "I found this in a place where it wasn't supposed to be," she said, her eyes darting around the corridor again. "It has strange writing on it, and some numbers, and it talks about dates and times. I think it might be some kind of plan, but I can't understand all the words." Thomas felt his professional composure beginning to crack. The princess was describing what sounded like potentially dangerous intelligence, the kind of information that security teams were trained to investigate immediately. But she was also a child who might have misunderstood something innocent, and his response could have consequences far beyond what either of them realized. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting longer shadows down the corridor and illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air between them. Somewhere in the distance, Thomas could hear the sound of other staff members going about their daily routines, their footsteps and voices, a reminder that the normal world of the castle continued around them while this extraordinary moment unfolded. Charlotte's eyes remained fixed on Thomas's face, searching for any sign that he would help her. There was a maturity in her expression that seemed beyond her 8 years, as if the weight of what she had discovered had forced her to grow up a little faster than she should have had to. The trust she was placing in him was both humbling and terrifying. "I know this might get you in trouble," Charlotte said, displaying a surprising understanding of the situation's complexity. "But I really think this is important, and I don't have anyone else I can trust with it. All the other adults think I'm just being dramatic or looking for attention, but I promise I'm not. I really found something scary." Thomas felt the weight of centuries of tradition pressing down on him, competing with his human instinct to protect and help someone in need. The Royal Guard had maintained its discipline and effectiveness precisely because its members followed orders without question and maintained boundaries without exception. Breaking these rules, even for what seemed like a good reason, could undermine the entire system that protected the royal family. But, looking at Charlotte's earnest face, seeing the genuine fear and frustration in her young eyes, Thomas realized that sometimes protecting the royal family might require more than just following traditional protocols. If there was even a small chance that she had discovered something genuinely dangerous, then his duty as a protector demanded that he take her concerns seriously, regardless of the personal cost. The decision crystallized in his mind with sudden clarity. Thomas took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to do would change everything about his service and possibly his entire life. For the first time in his career, he allowed himself to look directly into the eyes of a member of the royal family, acknowledging her as a human being rather than just a protected figure. "Tell me what you found, Your Royal Highness," Thomas said quietly, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was doing.
"I'm listening."
Charlotte's face lit up with relief and gratitude that was almost overwhelming to witness. In that moment, Thomas understood that he had made the right choice, regardless of the consequences that might follow. Sometimes doing the right thing required breaking the rules, even rules that had existed for centuries. The morning mist had cleared completely now, and the corridor was bright with sunlight that seemed to illuminate not just their physical surroundings but also the beginning of something entirely new. Thomas had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, but, as he prepared to listen to whatever Charlotte had discovered, he felt more like a true protector than he had in all his years of silent, motionless service. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it. The princess needed his help, and, for the first time in his career, Thomas Whitmore was about to put human compassion above royal protocol. Charlotte's relief was visible as she unfolded the paper with trembling hands, her young fingers careful not to damage what she clearly believed was crucial evidence. The document appeared to be a standard maintenance schedule at first glance, but, as Thomas examined it more closely, he began to notice the irregularities that had caught the princess's attention. "I found this yesterday when I was exploring the old library," Charlotte explained in hushed tones, constantly checking the corridor for approaching footsteps.
"You know the one in the North Tower that nobody uses anymore?"
"I like to go there sometimes when I want to be alone and read without anyone bothering me. It's quiet and has all those old books that smell like adventures."
Thomas nodded slightly, encouraging her to continue while maintaining his alert posture.
The North Tower Library had indeed been largely abandoned for years, used primarily for storing historical documents and books that were rarely accessed. It would be an unusual place for a child to discover anything significant, which made Charlotte's find all the more intriguing. "I was reaching for a book on the high shelf. I know I'm not supposed to climb on the chairs, but this book looked really interesting," Charlotte continued with the honesty typical of children her age. "When I pulled it out, this paper fell from behind it. At first I thought it was just some old document that someone had forgotten about, but then I started reading it." She pointed to specific lines on the paper, her finger tracing the text as she spoke.
"Look at these numbers here.
They match dates that are coming up soon and next week, actually. And these words here talk about access points and security rotations and optimal timing.
That doesn't sound like normal maintenance work to me."
Thomas studied the document more carefully, his trained eye picking up details that would escape most observers. The paper appeared to be legitimate castle stationery, complete with the proper watermarks and formatting.
However, the content was indeed unusual.
Most maintenance schedules focused on specific tasks and locations, not security timing and access routes. "There's more," Charlotte said, her voice dropping even lower.
"See this signature at the bottom? I've seen that handwriting before, but not on maintenance papers.
I've seen it on documents in Papa's study when I was helping him with his letters. But the person who wrote this isn't someone who should know about castle security procedures." The implication of Charlotte's words sent a chill through Thomas's professional consciousness. If she was correct, then someone with access to the royal family's private spaces had also gained knowledge of security protocols and was planning something for the dates mentioned on the document. The combination was potentially explosive and definitely dangerous. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas said carefully, using the formal address while keeping his voice low, "have you shown this to anyone else besides your parents?" Charlotte shook her head vigorously. "I tried to show Mama yesterday evening, but she was busy preparing for the charity event next week. She just glanced at it and said it looked like normal castle paperwork and that I shouldn't be in the North Tower anyway. Then, when I tried to show Papa this morning at breakfast, he was reading his important papers and said I was letting my imagination run away with me again."
Thomas understood the parents' response, though it troubled him.
Royal children were often creative and imaginative, and adults in their lives frequently dismissed concerns as fantasy to protect them from worrying about serious matters. However, this dismissal might have prevented crucial information from reaching the proper security channels. "I know they think I'm just being dramatic," Charlotte continued, her frustration evident in her voice. "But I'm not stupid.
I can read, and I understand more than they think I do.
When I see something that talks about security and timing and access, and it's hidden in a place where normal maintenance people wouldn't put it, that seems important to me.
Thomas had to admit that Charlotte's reasoning was sound. 8 years old or not, she had demonstrated observational skills and logical thinking that many adults might lack.
Her discovery, combined with her analysis of why it seemed suspicious, deserved serious consideration rather than dismissal. The dates on here, Charlotte said, pointing again to the numbers on the paper, they're for next Tuesday and Wednesday. That's when we're supposed to have the big charity garden party that Mama has been planning for months. There will be lots of people here, people from outside the castle, and everyone will be busy with the event. The significance of this timing was not lost on Thomas. Large public events at the castle created natural disruptions to normal security routines, with additional staff, outside vendors, and guests requiring modified protocols. If someone wanted to exploit vulnerabilities in castle security, such an event would provide ideal cover for unusual activities. Thomas glanced around the corridor, ensuring they remained alone while his mind raced through the implications of Charlotte's discovery. His training had taught him to evaluate threats methodically, considering both the credibility of sources and the plausibility of scenarios. While Charlotte was young, she was also intelligent, observant, and clearly taking her discovery seriously. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas said slowly, weighing each word carefully, "I believe you found something that needs to be investigated properly. But I need to ask you some important questions to make sure I understand everything correctly." Charlotte straightened up, her young face showing both relief and determination.
"Ask me anything.
I want to help figure out what this means and make sure nothing bad happens.
First, can you show me exactly where you found this document?
I need to understand whether its location was truly suspicious or if there might be an innocent explanation for why it was there."
Charlotte nodded eagerly. "I can show you exactly where it was.
I remember because I had to move 3 different books to reach the one I wanted, and this paper was definitely hidden behind the book, not just accidentally dropped there.
Someone put it there on purpose. Second, you mentioned recognizing the handwriting. Can you tell me more about where you've seen it before, and whether you remember what kinds of documents it was on?"
Charlotte's expression became more thoughtful as she considered this question.
"I've seen it on letters that come to Papa's study, usually in the afternoon when he's reading his daily correspondence.
They're always in official envelopes with important-looking seals. I thought they were from other royal households or government people, but now I'm not sure." This information added another troubling dimension to the situation. If the handwriting belonged to someone who regularly corresponded with the royal family, then the security breach implied by the document would be even more serious. It would suggest that someone within their trusted circle had either been compromised or was actively working against them. "Third, and this is very important," Thomas continued, "besides your parents, have you mentioned finding this document to anyone else?
Even casually, or as part of another conversation?"
Charlotte shook her head firmly.
"No, I haven't told anyone else.
I thought about asking my governess about some of the words I didn't understand, but something about the whole thing felt like it should be kept secret.
I've learned to trust my instincts about when things feel wrong." Thomas was impressed by Charlotte's mature judgment in this regard.
Many children her age would have shared such a discovery widely, potentially compromising any investigation that might follow. Her discretion suggested both intelligence and an understanding of the seriousness of what she had found. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas said, making a decision that he knew would have far-reaching consequences, "I believe you've discovered something that could be very important for your family's safety. What you've done, bringing this to someone who can help investigate it properly, shows real courage and good judgment."
Charlotte's face brightened with validation and relief.
For days, she had been carrying the burden of her discovery alone, dismissed by the adults she had tried to trust with her concerns. Having someone finally take her seriously was clearly a tremendous relief. "But I need you to understand," Thomas continued, "that what I'm about to do will probably get me in serious trouble. Guards aren't supposed to have conversations like this with members of the royal family, and investigating something like this without going through proper channels could cost me my position." Charlotte's expression became serious again, showing a maturity beyond her years.
I don't want you to get in trouble because you helped me. Maybe we should find another way to handle this.
No, Your Royal Highness, Thomas replied firmly.
Sometimes protecting people requires taking risks, and that's exactly what guards are supposed to do. The difference is that usually we take physical risks, not career risks. But if there's a chance that you've discovered a real threat to your family, then investigating it is more important than following normal procedures. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor, causing both Charlotte and Thomas to tense. The princess quickly folded the document and slipped it back into her school bag while Thomas resumed his standard rigid posture. A housekeeping staff member appeared around the corner, nodded respectfully to Charlotte, and continued on their way without seeming to notice anything unusual. Once they were alone again, Charlotte spoke in an even lower whisper.
What should we do now? I don't think I can convince Mama and Papa to take this seriously, especially with the garden party taking up so much of their attention. Thomas had been considering this question while they talked, and he had reached a conclusion that both excited and terrified him. I think we need to investigate this ourselves, carefully and quietly, to gather enough evidence to convince the proper authorities that this deserves their attention.
You mean like being detectives?
Charlotte asked, her eyes lighting up with interest despite the serious nature of their conversation. Something like that, Thomas replied, though he was acutely aware of how dangerous this course of action could be. But it would have to be done very carefully, and we would need to be extremely cautious about not alerting anyone who might be involved in whatever this document represents. Charlotte nodded seriously, understanding the gravity of what he was suggesting.
I can be careful. I'm good at being quiet and noticing things. And I know the castle better than most people think I do.
Thomas believed her. Royal children often had more freedom to move around their homes than adults realized, and Charlotte had already demonstrated exceptional observational skills and discretion. If they were going to investigate this potential threat quietly, her knowledge and access could be invaluable. Here's what I'm thinking, Thomas said, glancing around once more to ensure their privacy. During my off-duty hours, I can investigate the locations and people mentioned in this document. Meanwhile, you can observe the staff members who have access to your father's study and see if you notice anything unusual in their behavior.
What kind of unusual behavior should I look for?
Charlotte asked, showing her eagerness to contribute meaningfully to their investigation. Changes in routine, conversations that stop when you enter a room, people accessing areas they don't normally visit, anyone showing unusual interest in security procedures or event planning, Thomas explained.
But you must be very subtle about it. If someone is actually planning something harmful, we don't want them to know we're onto them.
Charlotte absorbed this information seriously, clearly understanding the importance of their mission.
I can do that. I'm always watching people anyway. It's interesting to see how adults behave when they think children aren't paying attention.
The morning had progressed significantly during their conversation, and Thomas knew that other staff members would soon be moving through this area more frequently.
They needed to conclude their discussion and establish a way to continue communicating without drawing attention.
We need a way to share information, Thomas said.
But it has to be completely secret. Can you think of a place where we could leave messages for each other?
Charlotte considered this carefully.
There's a loose stone in the wall near the garden entrance.
I discovered it months ago when I was playing. I could put notes there, and you could check when you're doing your rounds. It was a simple but effective solution.
Thomas often patrolled the garden areas during his shifts, so accessing the hiding spot wouldn't require any deviation from his normal duties.
That could work perfectly. But we'll need to be very careful about when and how we use it.
I understand, Charlotte replied.
This is important, and I don't want to mess it up by being careless. Thomas felt a surge of respect for the young princess. She was approaching this situation with a seriousness and maturity that many adults would struggle to match. Her willingness to help investigate a potential threat to her own family, despite the risks involved, showed remarkable courage. Your Royal Highness, Thomas said, his voice carrying both respect and affection, I want you to promise me something. If at any point during this investigation you feel scared or unsafe, you'll find a way to tell me immediately.
Your safety is more important than solving any mystery.
"I promise," Charlotte replied solemnly. "And I want you to promise that if this gets you in too much trouble, you'll tell me so I can try to fix it. I don't want you to lose your job because you helped me." Thomas smiled slightly, touched by her concern for his welfare. "I promise too, Your Royal Highness. We're partners in this now, and partners look out for each other." The word partners seemed to resonate with Charlotte, giving her a sense of importance and responsibility that transformed her from a worried child into a determined investigator. She stood a little straighter, her expression showing the kind of resolve that would serve her well in whatever challenges lay ahead. As they prepared to part ways and resume their normal activities, Thomas felt the weight of what they had begun settle over him. He had broken centuries of tradition, formed an unprecedented alliance with a member of the royal family, and committed himself to an investigation that could either save lives or destroy his career. But, looking at Charlotte's brave, determined face, he knew he had made the right choice. Sometimes protecting people required more than just following orders and standing at attention. Sometimes it required listening, believing, and acting on faith in the goodness and intelligence of others, even when those others were 8 years old. 3 days had passed since Charlotte and Thomas began their secret investigation, and the evidence they were uncovering painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Thomas had spent his off-duty hours carefully researching the locations and personnel mentioned in the mysterious document, while Charlotte had been observing the castle staff with the keen attention of someone who understood that lives might depend on what she noticed. Their communication system using the loose stone near the garden entrance had proven effective. Each morning, Thomas would find carefully written notes from Charlotte detailing her observations, and each evening, she would discover his responses along with instructions for what to watch for next. The 8-year-old princess had demonstrated remarkable skill at covert observation, noting details that even experienced security personnel might have overlooked. Charlotte's latest note had been particularly troubling. She had observed Stephen Morrison, one of the senior household staff members, accessing areas of the castle that were outside his normal responsibilities. More concerning, she had witnessed him photographing room layouts and security equipment with his personal phone, always when he thought no one was watching. Thomas knew Morrison well. The man had worked at the castle for over 15 years, maintaining an impeccable reputation and earning the trust of the royal family. He had access to virtually every area of the castle, knew security procedures intimately, and would be perfectly positioned to provide inside information to anyone planning an attack during the upcoming charity garden party. During his investigation, Thomas had discovered that Morrison's financial situation had deteriorated significantly over the past year. Public records showed mounting debts, failed investments, and recently missed mortgage payments. The man was clearly under severe financial pressure, which could make him vulnerable to offers of money in exchange for information or assistance. The handwriting on the document had been more difficult to trace, but Thomas's careful observation had finally yielded results. During his rounds, he had noticed Morrison writing notes in the staff logbook, and the penmanship matched the signature on the suspicious document exactly. The connection was clear, though proving it would require more evidence than they currently possessed. On this particular morning, Charlotte had requested an urgent meeting through their message system. She had discovered something that couldn't wait for their usual evening communication. Thomas had arranged to be assigned to corridor duty near the library, knowing that Charlotte often spent time there during her morning study periods. When Charlotte appeared in the library doorway, her usually composed demeanor showed signs of stress and urgency. She glanced around carefully before approaching Thomas's position, moving with the casual confidence of someone who belonged in these spaces while maintaining the alertness of someone who understood the dangers they were investigating. "I found something else," Charlotte whispered, producing another document from her school bag. This was in Morrison's coat pocket when he hung it in the staff room yesterday. "I saw him put it there when he thought no one was looking, and I managed to borrow it during lunch when everyone was busy." Thomas felt a mixture of admiration and concern at Charlotte's initiative. Her investigative instincts were impressive, but he worried about the risks she was taking. If Morrison realized his documents were being accessed, it could trigger whatever plan was in motion and put Charlotte in direct danger. The document she handed him was a detailed floor plan of the castle's main reception areas, marked with notes about security camera locations, guard rotations, and what appeared to be optimal routes for moving through the building undetected. The paper also contained a schedule that corresponded exactly with the timing of the charity garden party, including specific time slots when security would be focused on guest management rather than internal monitoring. "This is definitely not normal staff documentation," Charlotte observed, her voice showing both excitement at their discovery and worry about its implications. "Morrison shouldn't have detailed security information like this, and he certainly shouldn't be marking escape routes and blind spots." Thomas studied the document carefully, his military training helping him understand the tactical implications of what Morrison had prepared. Someone with this information could move through the castle during the party with minimal risk of detection, potentially placing explosives, accessing secure areas, or positioning themselves for an attack on the royal family. "There's more," Charlotte continued, her expression growing more serious. "I've been watching Morrison like you suggested, and his behavior has definitely changed over the past few days. He's been having quiet conversations with people I don't recognize. They're not regular castle staff, but they've been coming and going through the service entrances." This information confirmed Thomas's worst fears. If Morrison was bringing outsiders into the castle and providing them with detailed security intelligence, then whatever was being planned was likely imminent and potentially devastating. The charity garden party, scheduled for the following day, would provide perfect cover for an operation that had clearly been planned for months. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas said carefully, "I think we've discovered enough evidence to prove that a serious threat exists. The question now is how to get this information to the proper authorities without compromising our investigation or putting you in danger." Charlotte had clearly been thinking about this same problem. "I've been trying to figure out a way to get Mama and Papa to listen, but they're so focused on the party preparations that they barely have time for normal conversations, let alone discussions about security threats they don't believe exist." Thomas understood the challenge. With less than 24 hours until the event, the royal family would be completely focused on final preparations and guest management. Approaching them with allegations against a trusted staff member, based on evidence gathered through unauthorized investigation by a guard and an 8-year-old princess, would likely be dismissed as fantasy or paranoia. "What about the head of security?" Charlotte suggested. "Couldn't we take our evidence directly to him?" "The problem," Thomas explained, "is that I've been conducting this investigation without authorization, which means I've violated multiple protocols and procedures. Even if Commander Hayes believes our evidence, my actions could result in criminal charges, not just dismissal from service." Charlotte's face showed genuine distress at this possibility. Throughout their investigation, she had been aware that Thomas was taking career risks to help her, but the mention of potential criminal consequences clearly troubled her deeply. "I don't want you to go to prison because you helped me," she said, her voice showing both gratitude and guilt. "Don't worry about that right now," Thomas replied, though he was acutely aware of the legal implications of his actions. "The important thing is preventing whatever Morrison and his associates are planning. We can deal with the consequences afterward." As they discussed their options, the sound of approaching footsteps caused them both to fall silent. Morrison himself appeared in the library doorway, his eyes scanning the room in a way that seemed more suspicious than casual. When he noticed Charlotte and Thomas, his expression shifted slightly, showing what might have been concern or calculation. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Morrison said with his usual polite tone, though Thomas detected an underlying tension that hadn't been there in previous interactions. "I was just looking for some documents that seem to have gone missing from the staff office." "You haven't seen any loose papers around here, have you?" Charlotte's composure was remarkable for someone her age. She looked up from the book she had quickly opened as cover, her expression showing innocent curiosity rather than the guilty knowledge that Thomas knew she possessed. "What kind of documents, Mr. Morrison? I can help you look for them." "Oh, just some boring maintenance schedules and staff assignments," Morrison replied, though his eyes continued to scan the room carefully. "Nothing that would interest you, I'm sure. But, if you do happen to see any official-looking papers lying around, please let me know." "Of course," Charlotte replied sweetly. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Morrison nodded and left the library, but not before giving Thomas a look that seemed to linger a moment too long. After his footsteps faded down the corridor, Charlotte turned to Thomas with obvious concern. "Do you think he suspects that we know something?" Thomas had been wondering the same thing. Morrison's appearance in the library could have been coincidental, but the timing felt suspicious. If he had realized that his documents were missing, he might be trying to determine who could have accessed them. Charlotte's presence in the library, combined with Thomas's assignment in the area, might have raised his suspicions. "We need to be extra careful from this point forward," Thomas said. "If Morrison thinks we're onto him, he might accelerate whatever timeline he's working with, or he might try to eliminate potential witnesses." The gravity of this possibility settled over them both. What had started as a child's concerning discovery had evolved into a life-threatening situation that could affect not just the royal family, but anyone who had stumbled onto the conspiracy. Charlotte had unwittingly placed herself in the center of a dangerous plot, and Thomas's decision to help her had put them both at risk. "I think we need to find a way to warn someone today," Charlotte said, her voice showing determination despite the fear that Thomas could see in her eyes. "Even if they don't believe us at first, at least we'll have tried to prevent whatever's going to happen tomorrow." Thomas agreed, but he was still struggling with how to present their evidence in a way that would be taken seriously. Their investigation had been thorough, but it had also been completely unauthorized and conducted by individuals who lacked official authority to gather intelligence. "What if we approach this differently?" Charlotte suggested, her young mind finding creative solutions that Thomas's military training might have overlooked. "What if we find a way to make Morrison reveal himself, so that other people can see what he's really doing?" The idea intrigued Thomas, though he was concerned about the risks involved. "What are you thinking?" "Well," Charlotte said, her expression showing the kind of planning that suggested she had been considering this possibility for some time, "Morrison doesn't know that we've seen his documents. What if we set up a situation where he has to choose between protecting his cover and proceeding with his plan?" Thomas could see the logic in her suggestion, but the dangers were obvious. That could force him to act before he's ready, which might prevent whatever attack he's planning. But it could also make him desperate, and desperate people are unpredictable and dangerous. "But if we do it somewhere public, where other people can see what happens, then we'd have witnesses," Charlotte pointed out. "And if something goes wrong, at least people would know that there really was a threat." The strategy had merit, but it would require careful planning and perfect timing. They would need to create a situation that exposed Morrison's intentions without putting Charlotte or the royal family in immediate danger. With less than a day before the charity garden party, their window for action was rapidly closing. "If we're going to try something like that," Thomas said, "we need to plan it very carefully. And we need to make sure that even if something goes wrong, the right people will see the evidence we've gathered." Charlotte nodded seriously, understanding that they were moving beyond investigation into active intervention. "I can copy the documents we've found and hide copies where someone will definitely find them if anything happens to us." Thomas was struck by the maturity and courage Charlotte was displaying. Most adults would be paralyzed by the knowledge that they had stumbled onto a conspiracy of this magnitude, but she was calmly planning how to ensure their evidence would survive even if they didn't. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas said, his voice carrying deep respect and affection, "I want you to know how proud I am of your courage and intelligence. But I also need you to promise me that if I tell you to run or hide tomorrow, you'll do it immediately without asking questions." "I promise," Charlotte replied. "But I need you to promise that you won't try to handle everything by yourself. We're partners, remember? Partners work together and protect each other." Thomas smiled at the reminder of their agreement, though he was acutely aware that protecting Charlotte might require him to break that promise if necessary. However, her partnership had been invaluable, and her insights had uncovered evidence that might save lives. As they prepared to implement their plan, Thomas felt the weight of responsibility settling over him like a heavy cloak. Tomorrow's charity garden party would determine whether their investigation had prevented a tragedy or merely delayed it. Either way, by the end of the day, the centuries of tradition that had governed his service would be permanently changed, and the relationship between guards and the royal family would never be the same. But, looking at Charlotte's determined face, Thomas knew that some changes were worth the cost. Sometimes protecting people required more than following orders and maintaining distance. Sometimes it required trust, partnership, and the courage to break rules that no longer served their intended purpose. The morning of the charity garden party dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming across the castle grounds and illuminating the elaborate preparations that had been underway since before sunrise. Catering staff arranged tables beneath elegant white tents, florists added final touches to spectacular arrangements, and security personnel conducted their standard pre-event sweeps with no awareness of the additional threat that Thomas and Charlotte had discovered. Thomas had been assigned to perimeter duty for the event, a position that would allow him to observe Morrison's activities while maintaining visual contact with Charlotte throughout the day. They had agreed on a series of subtle signals that would allow them to communicate across the crowded garden without drawing attention to their partnership. Charlotte appeared in the garden early, ostensibly to inspect the preparations before guests arrived, but actually to implement the plan they had developed. She had hidden copies of all their evidence in 3 different locations, ensuring that even if Morrison discovered their investigation, the documentation of his conspiracy would survive. She had also prepared a letter explaining everything they had learned, sealed in an envelope addressed to Commander Hayes and hidden where it would be found if anything happened to her. The first guests began arriving at noon, and, within an hour, the garden was filled with well-dressed supporters of various charitable causes, castle staff managing the complex logistics of the event, and additional security personnel monitoring the unusual activity. The atmosphere was festive and relaxed, with no one except Thomas and Charlotte aware of the potential danger lurking beneath the surface. Morrison moved through the event with his usual professional efficiency, supervising catering arrangements and ensuring that VIP guests received appropriate attention. To casual observers, his behavior appeared completely normal, but Thomas noticed subtle deviations from standard protocols. Morrison was positioning himself near specific security checkpoints, observing guard rotations, and maintaining contact with several individuals who didn't appear on the official guest list. At 2 o'clock, Charlotte initiated the plan they had agreed upon. She approached Morrison with what appeared to be a simple question about refreshment locations, but her words contained a coded message designed to test his knowledge of information he shouldn't possess. "Mr. Morrison," Charlotte said with innocent curiosity, "Mama was wondering about the security arrangements for this afternoon. She mentioned something about being concerned about the North Tower access, especially with the maintenance work scheduled for today." There was no maintenance work scheduled for the North Tower, and no legitimate reason for Morrison to know about security arrangements in that area. His response would reveal whether their suspicions about his involvement were correct. Morrison's reaction was subtle but telling. His eyes sharpened slightly, and Thomas noticed a brief hesitation before he responded with apparently casual interest. "Oh, I hadn't heard about any concerns with the North Tower. Is there something specific Her Majesty is worried about?" The question confirmed their worst fears. Morrison was fishing for information about what the royal family might know or suspect, which suggested he was indeed involved in planning something that would require knowledge of their security concerns. Charlotte had successfully prompted him to reveal himself, but now they needed to escalate the situation to force his hand completely. "I'm sure it's nothing important," Charlotte replied with the perfect innocence of a child sharing information she probably shouldn't. She just mentioned that the new security protocols for that area might not be fully tested yet, especially the ones scheduled to change at 4 o'clock today. Again, there were no new security protocols, and no changes scheduled for 4 o'clock. But Morrison's expression showed clear interest in this fictional information, confirming that he was indeed planning something that would be affected by security arrangements in the North Tower area. Thomas watched this exchange from his position across the garden, admiring Charlotte's skill at extracting intelligence while appearing to be having a casual conversation. Her performance was worthy of a trained agent, and she was successfully manipulating Morrison into revealing information about his intentions. But the success of their plan created a new problem. Morrison now believed he had inside information about security changes that might affect whatever operation he was planning. If he acted on this false information, he might accelerate his timeline or modify his approach in ways that could create additional dangers. At 3 o'clock, Thomas observed Morrison having urgent quiet conversations with 3 men who had been circulating through the party as apparent guests. Their body language suggested they were receiving new instructions, and one of them immediately left the garden area, presumably to implement whatever changes Morrison's conversation with Charlotte had prompted. Charlotte caught Thomas's eye and gave the subtle signal they had agreed upon to indicate that she believed immediate action was necessary. Morrison's behavior suggested that whatever had been planned for later in the day was now being moved forward, possibly to take advantage of what he thought was intelligence about security vulnerabilities. Thomas faced the most difficult decision of his career and, possibly, his life. He could maintain his position and hope that regular security protocols would be sufficient to handle whatever Morrison was planning, or he could break centuries of tradition by abandoning his post to take direct action against a perceived threat. The decision crystallized when he saw one of Morrison's associates moving toward the castle's main entrance with what appeared to be a maintenance bag. The man's route would take him through areas where the royal family would be gathering before their scheduled appearance at the party, and his timing corresponded perfectly with the window when security attention would be focused on the garden rather than interior spaces. Thomas made his choice with the clarity that comes from absolute conviction. He stepped away from his assigned position and moved quickly toward the castle, knowing that his actions would be observed by fellow guards and would trigger immediate questions about his deviation from protocol. Sergeant Whitmore called Commander Hayes, who had noticed Thomas's movement.
"Where are you going?" "Your position is perimeter security."
Thomas stopped and turned to face his commanding officer, knowing that what he said next would determine not just his own fate, but potentially the safety of the royal family and everyone at the event. "Sir, I have discovered evidence of a credible threat to the royal family that is actively in progress. I need to brief you immediately on intelligence gathered through unauthorized investigation." The words hung in the air between them, creating a moment of tension that seemed to stretch endlessly. Commander Hayes's expression showed confusion, concern, and the beginning of anger at Thomas's apparent abandonment of his duties during a high-security event. "Explain yourself immediately, Sergeant," Hayes commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who would tolerate no deviation from proper procedure. "Sir, Princess Charlotte discovered documents indicating that Stephen Morrison has been providing detailed security information to unknown associates who are planning an attack during today's event. We have physical evidence of floor plans, security schedules, and financial records showing Morrison's compromised position." Hayes's expression shifted rapidly from anger to alarmed attention. "Where is this evidence, and why wasn't this information reported through proper channels immediately upon discovery?" "The evidence is secure, sir, and I take full responsibility for conducting an unauthorized investigation. But, right now, Morrison's associates are moving toward the castle with materials that could be weapons or explosives, and we need to act immediately." Commander Hayes looked toward the garden area, where Morrison could be seen continuing his apparent normal duties while subtly observing the security response to Thomas's conversation with the commander. "If you're wrong about this, Sergeant, your career is over. If you're right, then protocol violations are the least of our concerns." "I understand, sir. Princess Charlotte is prepared to provide a full briefing on our investigation and show you the evidence we've gathered. But immediate action is required to prevent whatever is planned for the next few minutes." Hayes made the command decision with the speed and authority that had earned his position. "Alert all units to Code Yellow status immediately. Detain Morrison and his known associates for questioning. Secure the castle interior and implement lockdown protocols for the royal family." The garden erupted into controlled activity as security personnel received their new instructions through discreet communication channels. Guests continued enjoying the party, unaware that a potential crisis was unfolding around them, while guards moved into enhanced protection positions. Morrison's reaction to the increased security activity confirmed everything that Thomas and Charlotte had discovered. Instead of showing the confusion that an innocent staff member would display, he immediately began moving toward one of the garden's exit points while signaling to his associates to abort their operation. The attempted escape provided the final proof that Hayes needed to validate Thomas's unprecedented breach of protocol. Morrison was intercepted before reaching the garden boundary, and his associates were detained while attempting to remove suspicious packages from the castle interior. Charlotte appeared at Thomas's side as the immediate crisis was contained, her young face showing relief mixed with the exhaustion that comes from sustained tension and fear. "Did we stop them in time?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying the weight of everything they had been through together. "Yes, Your Royal Highness," Thomas replied, his own relief evident in his voice. "We stopped them in time." Commander Hayes approached them both, his expression showing a complex mixture of professional anger at protocol violations and personal gratitude for a crisis averted.
Princess Charlotte, Sergeant Whitmore, you both have significant explaining to do. But, first, I need to understand exactly what evidence you've gathered and how extensive this conspiracy might be. Over the following hour, Charlotte provided a detailed account of her investigation with the poise and precision of someone much older than her 8 years. She showed Hayes the hidden documents, explained the observations that had led to their discovery of Morrison's involvement, and detailed the intelligence gathering that had revealed the scope of the planned attack. Hayes listened with growing amazement at the thoroughness of their investigation and the accuracy of their analysis. "Your Royal Highness," he said when Charlotte finished her briefing, "your observational skills and investigative instincts are remarkable. You may have prevented a tragedy that could have affected not just your family, but everyone at today's event." Thomas waited for the commander's attention to turn to him, knowing that his own reckoning was about to begin. The successful prevention of the attack would not eliminate the consequences of his unprecedented breach of protocol and unauthorized investigation. "Sergeant Whitmore," Hayes said, his voice carrying formal authority, "your actions today violated virtually every protocol that governs guard behavior. You engaged with a member of the royal family without authorization, conducted intelligence gathering without proper oversight, and abandoned your assigned position during a high-security event." "Yes, sir," Thomas replied, standing at attention and accepting responsibility for his choices. "However," Hayes continued, "your actions also prevented what appears to have been a serious attack on the royal family and potentially saved lives. The evidence you and Princess Charlotte gathered was professionally thorough and your analysis was accurate." Hayes paused, considering the unprecedented nature of the situation before him. "The traditional penalties for your protocol violations would include immediate dismissal and possible criminal charges. However, the circumstances of this case are unique and the results speak for themselves." Charlotte stepped forward, her young voice carrying surprising authority. "Commander Hayes, if Sergeant Whitmore is punished for helping me protect my family, then I will personally explain to everyone exactly how useful those old protocols are when real threats need to be addressed." The threat was delivered with the unconscious confidence of someone born to authority, and Hayes recognized both the sincerity of Charlotte's conviction and the implications of her position. "Your Royal Highness, I assure you that Sergeant Whitmore's actions will be evaluated fairly and with full consideration of the circumstances." The resolution came not from formal disciplinary procedures, but from a conversation between Charlotte and her parents that evening. The princess provided them with a complete account of the investigation, emphasizing Thomas's professionalism, wisdom, and courage throughout their partnership. She made it clear that any punishment of the guard who had helped save their lives would be seen as a betrayal of everything they claimed to value about loyalty and service. Within a week, Thomas found himself promoted to a new position as Special Security Liaison, with responsibilities that included evaluating potential threats and maintaining communication with family members about security concerns. The role was unprecedented, but, then, again, so was the partnership that had created the need for it. Charlotte continued to demonstrate the observational skills and investigative instincts that had uncovered Morrison's conspiracy, and Thomas found himself serving as both protector and partner in addressing the security challenges that came with royal life in a modern world. The centuries-old tradition of silent, distant guardianship had been forever changed by the courage of an 8-year-old princess and the wisdom of a guard who chose to listen when listening mattered most. Sometimes the most important service required breaking the rules that no longer served their purpose, and sometimes protecting people meant trusting them enough to accept their help when they offered it. The hidden signal that Charlotte had given Thomas that first morning in the corridor, her request for help and trust in his willingness to provide it, had started a chain of events that proved that tradition was only valuable when it served the people it was meant to protect. When it failed in that purpose, it needed to change, regardless of how long it had existed or how sacred it had become. In the end, the most important tradition was the one they had created together, the understanding that protection worked best when it was a partnership between people who trusted each other enough to share both the risks and the responsibility of keeping each other safe. SSS